All right. So, wait for some people to show up, and we're going to do another quick stage. So, this one's going to be easy. We've mixed, and then we waited half an hour, and now we added the salt, and then we waited another half an hour, and now we're going to start the fold process. So, this process we're going to do about 4 or 5 times, waiting about a half an hour between each one. And all we're doing is stretching the dough out a little bit, giving it a few little folds, and then letting it rest. So let's get right to it. You can always rewind if you need to see it again. So it's going to be pretty short. I'll show you the bowl. So we got our salt added, we waited, and now we got just a little bit of water. Get your hands damp, just a little bit of water on them, and then go, let's see, how are we gonna, I don't know how we're gonna see this best. So go in, lift up, stretch it down, turn it 90 degrees, go into the next corner, lift up, stretch, same thing, lift, stretch, lift, stretch, and lift the whole thing. So you're just kind of hanging it and stretching it. Done. That's it. So what we're going to do now is add a little olive oil and move it into a clean container so that it doesn't stick much. So pick it up, put it in your container, and we're done. So now you're going to do that process 4 more times, 3 or 4 more times, waiting a half an hour between each one. So this is our first set of folds. We'll wait half an hour, let it rest, and then we'll do a second set of folds. And then same thing, let it rest a half an hour, give it time to relax, and then give it more folds. So you'll pick up a corner, stretch it, 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 and then maybe flip the whole thing over and hang it and let it stretch. It doesn't really matter too much exactly what you do, but you want to, so what you're doing is you're taking those gluten proteins and you're changing them from balls and you're slowly stretching them out so that they will trap gases. You're also creating more gluten. So there's 2 different proteins that make up gluten, and with the addition of water, they're brought together and they form gluten. So when you're stretching it and folding it, mixing it, you're taking more of those 2 different proteins and you're bringing more of them together. So you're creating more gluten, and then you're taking the gluten which is already created and you're slowly stretching it out. And the reason why we do it slow and we let it rest is proteins are a lot like cotton balls. They're all bound up. And so if you can imagine ripping a cotton ball apart, if you picked it on both sides and you just did this, it would rip. But if you kind of teased it apart slowly, you could get all of those strands apart without ripping too many of them. So that's essentially what we're doing over a long period of time. So we'll stretch, and then we'll let it rest, and then we'll stretch. So at this point, we'll do that 4 more times. That won't be on video. And then after those, so about 2 hours of that, and then we will we'll let it bulk ferment for another couple hours until it's about ready. And that's when the next video is going to be. Still kind of trying to figure out what the schedule is exactly going to be or how that makes sense. But we'll come back when it's completely bulk fermented, and we'll poke it and touch it, and you can kind of see what it looks like when it's ready. Any questions? I'm still kind of trying to figure out how this is working and what people need to know. So I figure for this first one, for the first couple, we're just kind of getting used to what I'm doing, and we'll do the same thing again and again. So you can start following along and start baking along. So anyone need numbers? Anyone? I don't know who's watching. So any comments before I sign out? Otherwise, we'll be back at, I think, 10 p.m. late. Let's see, AW. So AW, we'll start with your question. If it looks more slack, hard to say. So brand of flour does matter. What matters more than that is the amount of whole grain flour. So whole grain flour is going to take more water to hydrate it. So if you're using a different amount of whole grain, then that would make a very, very big difference. So 100% hydration with a 100% whole grain loaf will look about the same as a 70% hydration of all white flour. So that's probably the difference. The brands do matter because they're different. Nice. The brands do matter, but not usually that much, unless there's some more technical things that I don't think it's worth getting into because you can't buy those flours at a regular grocery store. So what you're getting at a normal grocery store, let me see what you're writing. 12% rye. Let's see. Yeah, so I'm using about 35-40% whole grain. 77. Yeah. Surprised that yours is not more slack at that percentage. Especially rye. It only has mostly one type of the protein used to make gluten. So rye doesn't make a ton of gluten. I forget which one, but it has the one so anyone who heard earlier, there's two different proteins that make gluten. And rye predominantly only has one of those. It does have some of the others. So there is some gluten in rye. It's just that it has more of the one protein, which the property of that is it provides the ability to stretch out, but not the elasticity. So that's why rye tends to flatten out and be dense, in part because it doesn't make a ton of gluten. It does have protein, but not a ton of gluten. Molly, by slack, what we're talking about is you either have stiff or you have slack. So stiff is where the dough is like denser, heavier, and it doesn't stretch as much. Stretch is kind of the wrong word, but like when you pick it up, does it like flop down or is it very solid? So when they're saying slack, they mean that as I'm picking it up and stretching it, it's very fluid. So stiffer is easier to handle, but they bake different and they taste different, and that's personal preference. Molly, getting to your question, feeding the starter. So this is a complicated one, but not really. All you're doing, so your starter is a mix of lactic acid producing bacteria and wild yeast strains, and you have a whole bunch of different ones in there. You don't really know unless you have your own personal lab. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep those guys alive and use them when they're the most healthy, when they're the most productive, when there's the most activity going on before they've started dying. So you want to feed it every day, but you just need it to be tiny. Actually, we'll feed our starter right now since I didn't do it earlier. So Molly, this is like our leftover dredges. So we used all of our starter culture for our bread, but in here there's like little scrapings. So we'll take this. Let me grab a fork. So I added just a little bit of water to this. So again, this is just, it's hard to see in the video, but just imagine that you took something sticky out of a yogurt container. There's just a little bit left. So I added a little bit of water, and I'm just going to stir it around so that I get some of that stuff off of the side. And then I have a real small container. So we'll do it by weight, just so we know. So I'm going to turn on the scale. And I'm going to pour about 25 grams of this little starter and water. So you can see it's just kind of a liquid right now. So then I've got 25 grams of essentially water with a little bit of starter in it. And then I'm going to add 25 grams of flour. It can be any kind of flour. It doesn't matter if it's whole grain, doesn't matter if it's white flour, doesn't matter if it's a mix. You can go back and forth. You could use rye. You could use pretty much anything. I'm going to add equal parts. So I have 25 grams of water, essentially. I'm going to add 25 grams of flour. Okay, so now I've got 25 of water, 25 of flour, and now I'm just going to stir it up. And stir and stir and stir. Okay, so going back to your question about slackness, Molly, this is very slack. You can see it's like goopy. It's almost like the consistency that you're going for. So this is 100% hydration. For those of you who were here earlier for Baker's percentage, this is equal parts flour and water. It's 100% flour always, and then it's 100% water. So you can see it's like a thick waffle batter. It comes off the fork a little bit, but it's definitely sticky. And that's it. You can see this is only about a third full. This is a very small container. This is how much starter. If I was going to make 500 loaves of bread tomorrow, I could turn this into 500 loaves of bread. You don't need a lot of starter, because every day what you're going to do. So now, Molly, we would wait for this until 24 hours later, and then we would take half of it out, dump it out. So now you have 25 grams of starter in here, and you would add about 12 grams of water and 12 grams of flour to get back to 50 grams total. So let's go over that one more time. So we have about 50 grams total here, and half of it's water, half of it's flour. So tomorrow, if we're not making bread, if we don't need more of this, if we're just keeping it alive, we would take out half of this. So there's 50 grams. We take out half, which is 25 grams. It's like a tablespoon. It's nothing. You're not wasting anything. Take out half of it, throw it away, or whatever. Eat it. I don't care. And then add a little bit of water and a little bit of flour. So 12 grams of water, 12 grams of flour, and you'll get back to 50 grams total. And that's it. Do that every day. And then when you want to make bread, we'll go over this in another video again, but when you want to make bread, you take this 50 grams and you would turn it into 150 grams to make a loaf of bread. So you take your 50, you need 100 grams more to get to 150. So you'd have 50 grams of water, 50 grams of flour, and then let it grow. And then you use it when it's all the way grown, but it hasn't collapsed yet, is kind of what you're looking for. So, sound good? Questions? I'm patient. I'll wait. And if anyone needs starter, I've got a bunch. Shoot me a text. Come by and pick some up. AW. That AW, that doesn't really matter. So bacteria is incredibly aggressive. As long as you have a happy, healthy culture, which it will be if you're feeding it every day, and you're not keeping it in the fridge, or you're not abandoning it for weeks on end. If you're feeding it every day, it's not going to let anything else in. It doesn't matter what you feed it with. It could change slowly over time, but that's going to happen naturally as well, because your environment is not always going to be the same. You're not feeding it at 72 degrees with 73 degree water for 6.5 hours. Because you're only going to be feeding it once a day, it's going to go past its peak viability, and some of it's going to begin to die off before you feed it 24 hours later. And so your culture is going to change because you're always stressing it just a little bit. So those stressors will make more of a difference than using a different flour. So that would only really make a difference if you were like being incredibly specific about making like 100% whole grain bread. So your starter would also be made with whole grain flour. Otherwise, you'd have to take that percentage off. Other than that, I haven't found any sort of a difference because your starter is always going to be morphing, which is also, people have heard me say it, destroys the lore um, of a really old culture, one from back in the miners in San Francisco. It's not the same culture. It changes and morphs and takes on different bacteria because there's so much activity and so much fighting going on. But using a different flour would not make that much of a difference and doesn't really matter. All right. Anything else? And we'll do this again and again. So I've got the schedule up on that Google Doc. So keep showing up. The next time we'll finish this, but the next time I go, there will be we'll do a full bake from the beginning. We'll feed the starter and we'll grow it together, and then we'll use it together. We'll go through the whole process from beginning to end. So if you want starter before then, so you can bake along, feel free, shoot me a text, and I'll leave some out at a safe 6 feet. So, all right. Thanks, y'all.